Hey, what's up guys? So before we start this thing, I have to apologize for the damn near immoral level of alterations I've had to do to this video. As some of you might know, fair use is a legal exemption to normal copyright law that allows people like me to critique and review pieces of media like this without risking a stay in the YouTube gulag, or a real one for that matter. But it seems like no one has sent EA that memo. Surprising, I know. So because of that, I've been elbow deep in DaVinci Resolve for the last few days trying to find the perfect intersection between making this video nearly unwatchable and avoiding getting hit with another copyright claim that'll leave my one and only source of income paused for a 2-week period. And just so you guys know, this is not going to affect me reviewing this kind of content in the future. I am legally allowed to critique content just like this using examples that I've used in this video, and I'll be damned if I'm not going to do just that. YouTube's Content ID system is now and has always been a massive piece of shit, which is a real accomplishment when set against the backdrop of the nearly infinite amount of terrible fixes and features old YT has released over the years. But I maintain that what I'm doing is perfectly allowed by US copyright law, and no one on this platform has the right to say otherwise. So to reiterate, I am very sorry for whatever state this video is in when you guys finally get a chance to watch it. I wish I didn't have to do nonsense like this, but until these Content ID issues get ironed out, honest creators like me are just going to have to keep skirting around them. Well, anyways, thanks for listening, and let's jump into the actual content of this video. Well, so far we have taken a look at how Dead Space has fared on the silver screen, and I gotta admit, all things considered, it has handled itself much better than other video game series have. But I'll let you guys in on a little secret. Since I started this retrospective, this was the specific video I was most excited to make. I'm really not sure why, but there's just something about seeing that killer Dead Space storyline playing out across the pages of a comic book. It just feels like the perfect medium for something like this. So, in the spirit of tackling something new, why don't you guys join me in diving into the pages of a comic book that, in my opinion, tells the most interesting story to be found in this little horror series. What's up guys, I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome to the Dead Space Retrospective. Like I said before, there's just something perfect about the combination of Dead Space and the comic book medium, so you might expect me to have been pretty stoked at the news that the series was moving on to the printed page, but I honestly didn't care too much about the game at the time. I was admittedly a late adopter to all this stuff, with me and my wife finally playing through the first DS game just a little bit after the second one was released. That being said, I knew I had found a story that really resonated with me once I finally did experience it for myself, so as soon as I could, I jumped face first into the extended library of other Dead Space media. And like you might have guessed, the first thing I gravitated towards was the Dead Space run of comics released by Image. They were a really awesome read, but I gotta assume 2/3 of you guys would jet after just a few seconds of nothing but still images on your screen. So luckily for you and me, I'm not forced to venture too far outside my comfort zone thanks to the motion comic put together as a little promo deal with Xbox Live, PSN, and the big game review sites. Which is really nice because this is genuinely the way I'd recommend you experience this thing anyways.
There is no goddamn marker!
Honestly, I've never really had a great imagination, so having pros manipulating the still images, adding music, and some honestly impressive voice acting is a major plus. But truthfully, this is all just periphery stuff. All you guys really need to know is that Visceral commissioned a killer prequel story for the first Dead Space game, and by some kind of insane luck, it was made into an awesome comic book and not some kind of heartless cash grab of a video game. The versions of this little motion comic that could be grabbed off the internet at the time were really good 720p renders, but all of them have this watermark in the corner from the website that they were hosted on, and that would likely not bother anyone who watched this, but would literally kill me to edit, because saying that I have OCD is a little bit of an understatement. So to further prove that, I captured the version that could be unlocked on the Wii spin-off Dead Space Extraction. Don't get me wrong, actual HD resolution source material would be really nice for this video, but using game capture of a motion comic running on a Wii, which is plugged into a video scaler, just sort of screams Avalanche Reviews to me. Oh, and by the way, some of you guys who, like me, are afflicted with the disease of caring way too much about video quality and standards might notice these obvious signs of bad scaling on diagonal lines here. And for those of you that live happy, well-adjusted lives, I'm talking about these little breaks in the diagonals. At first, I thought this might have had something to do with the Wii outputting an anamorphic widescreen picture when set to 16:9, which means it still sends out a 4:3 image but squishes it so that it'll look right when stretched to widescreen by your TV, but this issue is present in both display modes. I tried a hell of a lot messing with some OSSC settings and even tried out the FrameMeister to see if I could compensate for this, but I ended up with nothing, so it seems like whoever was responsible for putting this comic on the disc really sucked at their job. Either that or this is just the best you could do, putting a true HD widescreen image on a 480p anamorphic widescreen output.
Right on, bitch.
And I just bet some of you guys thought that there was no way I could talk about video quality in a comic book review video. Oh, ye of little faith. Well, anyways, after viewing this in both the widescreen and standard screen options, the standard one seems to make it a lot less glaringly obvious, so it looks like we're going to be looking at a 4:3 image today. Now, would this have been a non-issue if I just went ahead and used the good-looking widescreen versions of this motion comic available online like I said before? Yes, it absolutely would, but you didn't come here for a rational and practical approach to YouTube content, did you? And if you did, Jesus Christ, you're in the wrong place.
The planet, dumbass! We all have to leave the planet!
So the Dead Space motion comic starts out in what is really becoming a worn-out trick in the series at this point, the old distress call left after the fact, warning people about how messed up shit's about to get intro. This time being left by Sergeant Newman of PSEC on Aegis 7, which means yes, this is indeed a prequel to the first Dead Space game, and I'm not really sure why, but something about the events that preceded all the mess on the Ishimura have always been incredibly interesting to me. I don't know, maybe it's because Visceral did such a good job of world building throughout the games that I started to see them as being more realistic and thus maybe a little more worthy of really thinking about. Well, at any rate, we already know what happens here, or at the very least the broad strokes, but just in case I'll send it over to Sergeant Newman with his assessment of the current situation.
We are fucked.
I honestly don't know how he does it, but that man paints an incredible picture with words. Anyways, moving on after that intro scene, which sets up the bleak events to follow, we're taken back to the events surrounding the initial discovery of the marker on Aegis 7, and I have to say this is probably the most interesting version of this already well-worn event in the series. I think it might be because we get to see what the rest of the colony saw at the time, or it might be the actually kind of funny dialogue so far.
What the hell is that? But just hold on there, Commander, while I consult my book of weird shit.
During this time, we get to witness regular people having cool expository arguments with the unitologist stationed on Aegis 7, and if you ask me, that broader picture makes this whole thing feel a lot more substantial. Plus, so far the guys who made this motion comic really nailed a killer ominous soundtrack to go along with the deceptively cheery response people have towards finding this marker. To further set up that tension, during one of those public debates I mentioned earlier, two people end up nearly fighting over religious differences when our guy Newman steps in to arrest the rabble-rousers. Then we sit in on a doctor's visit with an Aegis 7 worker complaining of insomnia, and the doc seems to chalk it up to exhaustion and a little bit of inadequacy issues. After the visit, his nurse comments on how there have been a rise in cases like this lately. After this, we're taken to Union Square, which series vets will recognize from an event mentioned in a lot of Dead Space media, as a unitologist preacher is spreading the good word and conveniently delivering a great little intro to their church's backstory. Sergeant Newman interjects by taking a lot of jabs at unitology as a whole and really pisses off his partner, who turns out is a uni herself. So he continues on to further rant, making him sound less like a comic book character and more like an edgy 2006 YouTube atheist, and coincidentally comes up with some impressively good heavy metal lyrics on the way.
But in case you hadn't noticed, we already conquered heaven, and guess what? God wasn't home.
Then we get a little more exposition through the lens of a few workers who are on site with the marker, which, while not important to the story as a whole, really does a great job of opening up this little world and making it feel just a little more convincing. Afterwards, we shift to a hostage situation going down between the doctor and that miner who had issues sleeping before. When Newman and Cortez get there, he's got a knife to the doc's throat and he's ranting in that oh-so-familiar I've seen the marker in my dreams kind of way. The two PSEC officers successfully de-escalate the situation, but not completely without casualties. Then we get a little setup with high-ranking unitologist leaders calling fellow believers who are stationed on Aegis 7 and essentially activating them as sleeper cells for the church. with the obvious goal of getting their hands on the marker at all costs. The next issue starts out with a little memorial held for the slain nurse, and while giving some comforting words, the good doctor starts to experience that delirium he's been treating this whole time, after which we see Newman waking up his partner for their shift that apparently started more than an hour ago. Seems like Dr. Tom isn't the only main character suffering from a little markeritis. This scene does two things very well. First, it sets up a nice personal work relationship between these two, and second, it lets us know that Cortez is starting to appreciate Newman's constant jabs at her religion less and less. And I think it's this right here that really encapsulates what I love about this comic run. I mean, think about it. The real horror of Dead Space, the video game, is experiencing these necromorphs coming at you and trying to figure out new and innovative ways to detach their bottom halves from their top halves, but we're 2 issues into the comics already, and while it hasn't exactly been peaceful, there's been 0 attacks by alien creatures. It's been 20 minutes of solid, awesome setup, showing us the conditions around the settlement, how they've been getting worse, and the shady deals going on under the cover of all this marker business. And I think it's right here, as I'm writing this sentence, that I'm realizing I'll need a new approach here. You guys who have seen some of my movie reviews will probably notice that I typically go over the events of the film one after the other in chronological order, but I might want to treat this a little more like one of my game reviews. You guys have already had your first taste of what you can expect, but from here on out, let's get a little more vague so you don't get a lot of the cool stuff spoiled for you. As the run continues, we get more and more of suspense-heavy setup. In fact, it's round about 4 issues worth, which equals out to 2/3 of the run. The series continues showing us all of these seemingly unconnected events taking place, like a maintenance worker discovering what looks like a biological compound building up in the ventilation system, the continuing psychotic episodes being experienced by workers on the colony, and the friction being caused by the unitologists becoming emboldened by their proximity to the marker. We also get more insight into the events that had unis pulling strings to keep the marker where it is and to keep people outside of the Ishimura and Aegis 7 oblivious to its existence. Although thanks to our experience further in the series, we know that that was a very poorly kept secret. It's about the tail end of issue 4 when all of the pots this comic has been heating up finally start to boil, culminating in the start of the planet cracking process, which lines up exactly with Marla Jensen, a fellow PSEC officer, figuring out exactly what the marker can do with dead bodies. Once the planet crack gets underway, there's a massive power failure, and you know damn well that's when things really go to hell. The chaos of the blackout causes people to act even crazier than they were before, and we finally get our necromorph reveal. The rest of the issues deal with the survivors trying to get off the planet, and that's when we start to dip into the almost overcovered aspects of this incident that have been revealed in Extraction and Dead Space 2. Now don't get me wrong, it still has a great story, but I just can't shake the feeling that I've seen this all before. For me, the real fun was getting to know these characters and seeing the relatively quick and surprisingly complicated series of events that led to everything going to hell. Obviously, the panels of the original comic book do a great job telling this story, but things get really magical when you throw some damn good voice talent in the mix. Now, of course, these aren't the best voiced characters in media I've ever heard before. That title obviously still rests with Heather Mason, and I will be goddamned if I'm going to hear you say otherwise.
A detective? Really? Well, nice talking to you.
But they do an incredible job regardless. Thinking back on it, I really couldn't point to a bad performance throughout the entire motion comic. Even the smaller roles like this maintenance guy who's only in a few panels still sounds great. On top of that, the addition of tense musical accompaniments really just finishes off the whole experience. These ambient, dreary, and suspenseful tracks just bring the whole thing up to the next level. In fact, for the longest time, it was hard for me to go back to reading regular comic books because the lack of killer sound work. In fairness, outside of the context of this comic book, it's not the most musically impressive score, pretty much consisting of overlapping low tones and a climbing string accompaniment to add to that slow-building tension, but it does its job so well. I just couldn't imagine going back to reading the stationary pages of this comic, which embarrassingly isn't even my most prominent first world problem. Obviously, no critique of a visual medium like this could be complete without talking about the artwork, but it's here that I'm at a bit of an impasse. I generally don't like this look for comic books. I remember the Silent Hill comic Dying Inside really not impressing me with its scratchy, almost childlike approach to art, which is ironic since both Dead Space and Dying Inside were illustrated by Ben Templesmith. Now, I really don't want to trash this guy's style, since this is definitely the most subjective part of this video, but I just do not like his use of muted watercolor fills, thin, barely structured line work, and some panels that look like mock-up sketches for the final idea. Of course, I'm no artist myself, and I'm not looking to tell you that you shouldn't like this style, but I just don't find it too appealing. I get a kick out of the guy's rebellious punk rock approach to not blindly conforming to typical art tropes, and I really do appreciate some of the panels where things get ultra stylized when the characters experience intense emotions, but overall I just didn't think it fit very well. Especially when Masahiro Ito, a man of supreme taste and high-class values, already sort of laid out the foundation for how art should look in a Silent Hill property. That's not Photoshop, by the way. The guy actually said that. He's a fucking incredible follow on Twitter. So why go off on a rant about a completely unrelated comic series? Well, I'm going to contradict myself here by saying I think Temple Smith's art style works perfectly for this comic. Now, besides the fact that I really enjoy one of these comics and really don't like the other, there's some other stuff at work here. First off, his line work throughout Dead Space seems much thicker and less messy or scattered than Dying Inside, which really helps it look a lot more pleasing to me. As you can see, the color palette for the backgrounds is still very muted, sometimes with several pages using the same flat watercoloring, but something about the oppressive nature of the subject matter, I don't know, it just fits here. Now, I'm more than willing to admit that this might just be a case of severe bias on my part. After all, Silent Hill as a series has a well-established look. We all know how an SH property is supposed to look, or at least how it's supposed to look when it's being done right. But with Dead Space, we've seen several interpretations across several mediums, so maybe I'm just more likely to accept variation for something I haven't already locked down in my head as looking a certain way. But regardless of my justification, I just flat out think this is a great look for the property. The issues I mentioned in my Dead Space movie reviews, where necromorphs always look too clean and well lit, are no longer present here, which is awesome to see. This scratchy line work might not be the best for depicting actual proportions for human beings, but the almost impenetrable nature of it just makes the necromorphs pop off the page in a way that really fits their look in the games. Since combat in Dead Space is so frantic, I never really get a chance to take an up-close, steady look at these things in motion, so while I'm totally familiar with their silhouettes and general shape, I couldn't really recall any specific features of theirs off the top of my head, and everything I just described is exactly how they look in the comic. It's kind of like a police sketch artist making a drawing of something I forgot a long time ago in a dream, or maybe something less pretentious. These exaggerated proportions and the stylized approach just work so damn well with the necromorphs, and if I sound like I'm blabbing, it's because I'm still trying to figure out exactly why that is. Either way, Temple Smith gets nothing but praise from me as far as this comic's artwork is concerned. Continuing on from that point, I think the team responsible for transforming this into a motion comic did an amazing job of magnifying that artwork with awesome filters, subtle movement, and some killer overlays like static and CRT scanlines. Sometimes they'll go a little too far and move things around in an unnatural or unpleasing way, but for 99.9% of the motion comic, I was really impressed. I gotta imagine it took an immense amount of work to go through and decide on camera movements and manipulations for every single panel, but their hard work sure as hell paid off. And I know I don't exactly have to sum things up since I sort of started with my conclusion, but just in case you've skipped to this point without watching anything else, I really recommend you guys get a hold of this motion comic and give it a watch. It's an amazing story, and the addition of music, voice acting, and animation just cranks all that past 11. They can still be found on IGN, and paying $5 for a month of their ad-free service will let you download them in 720p, which is awesome, but I doubt any of that actually goes to the people who made this thing. I assume it doesn't need to be said, but these things can be found in less legal means like here on YouTube, and it also appears in the Wii version of Dead Space Extraction, but not the PS3 port for some reason, which is a little odd.
Get off him!
Regardless though, any way you plan on consuming it, it's worth tracking down. I know this is gonna sound crazy, but this is without a doubt my favorite Dead Space story so far, and that does include the games. Don't get me wrong, there are some killer tales to be told in this series, but something about this tense as hell thriller just played all my inner preferences. And I think that might be all I can say about this motion comic without giving anything away and spoiling something I truly think you guys should check out. So I'm gonna go ahead and get to work on the next video, which according to my notes is a motion comic on the PS3 with puzzle elements. That'll be something. But until then, here's hoping I catch all of you guys again right here on the Dead Space Retrospective. Hey guys, welcome to the end of the video. Thanks for humoring me while I try my hand at covering a comic book. If you're a fellow Dead Space fan, I'll have some other videos in the series linked here on screen, and if you like what I do here, maybe think about helping me out over on Patreon so we can keep this thing independent and I don't have to lie to you guys about how much I really love Raid Shadow Legends in the future. Well, bye for now, and until then, I guess go play some competing cheap mobile RPG made exclusively for children with access to their parents' credit cards. Peace out, guys.